Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this Inside webinar series, which is an employer panel discussion on making 20% off the job work, the approaches to delivery, impact, and compliance. We are very grateful that you're joining us this morning. I think it's a very topical subject in the area of apprenticeships. This employer webinar is being brought to you by Pearson in partnership with Campaign for Learning. And again, we are very grateful for our partners and indeed all of your participation in this webinar has been facilitated by our partners and our very valuable panel members. So I'll just quickly refer to our panel members now. Just very quickly about myself. My name is Rohini Bhattacharya. I'm the Director of Apprenticeships for Pearson, and I will be acting as the panel chair and moderating this discussion between our panel members. I'm also joined by senior people working within three very different organizations today. So we have Claire Leach, who is the Director of HR for Pepper UK, which is a global financial services group. We have Darren Avery, who is the apprenticeship lead from the Great Ormond Street Hospital, which is a leading world's children's hospital. And last but not least, we have David Bevan, who's the training and development specialist from Blue Chip, which is a B2B IT and infrastructure solutions provider working in the UK and globally as well. So I will quickly hand over to our panel members to say a few words, just introducing their respective organizations and also talking about themselves and their role within their organizations. So Claire from Pepper UK, would you like to go first?
Good morning. Yes, my name is Claire Lish. I'm the Director of Human Resources for Pepper UK. Pepper is a global financial services organisation incorporating residential mortgage and commercial servicing, as well as banks across the globe. My role within the organisation in the UK is to take a responsibility for human resources, facilities, health and safety, and of course learning and development, which is absolutely key, and a big part of that is our apprentice programme.
Thank you, Claire. Darren?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name's Darren Avery. I'm from Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital here in London. My role in the organisation is apprenticeship lead, so I work on our apprenticeship strategy. And if you want to know more about our hospital, please tune in tomorrow evening on ITV1, where we have a weekly series with Paula Grady's and our little hero. So please watch tomorrow. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that great plug-in, Darren. And David.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm David Bevan, and I work for a company called Blue Chip, which are an IT infrastructure managed services company that support other businesses with their critical IT solutions. I've been in L&D for about 5 years, and as a training and development specialist, I'm part of a 2-person L&D team, and I'm solely responsible for the apprenticeship and early careers program. The business, in terms of the ratio for apprentices to full-time other staff members, is around 10% apprenticeships. So we're looking at working with different providers and how we can kind of boost that early career start for people in the best way possible.
Great. Thank you very much to Claire, Darren, and David. So today we will discuss all of these 6 points, which are focused on the 20% of the job, and we will look at how these impacts the different panel members and their respective organizations. So I will kick off with David Bevan from Blue Chip. And David, if you could talk about what your organizational position is on the benefits of the 20% off the job, and how has this been implemented within your organization across the different roles?
So I think, you know, with apprenticeships, they're normally targeted towards younger people, but that's not necessarily the case. And actually, over the last couple of years, I've recognised that it can be anyone of any age and from any background. But the benefits that we've seen actually is, alongside whichever provider you use, whether it's a college or an outsourced company, they're going to focus on the standard, the actual educational piece to get them on the job in terms of learning that skill. And actually the benefits of off the job is all of the soft skill stuff. So if we take younger apprentices as an example, these are people that you can train in communication or time and energy management. We use insights training. We do, give them a psychometric profile that shows them their preference on how they communicate and deal with other people. And there's all these benefits that they're not going to learn at college or in a classroom when they're doing their studies. And so actually it's a huge benefit, because what we're saying is, this is really easy. Everyone sees 20% off the job as being quite a large number, quite daunting, but actually it's so easy to do, because we're upskilling these people to give them the right type of behaviours that link into the company values. When we're talking about what type of people do we want, really it's looking nowadays, I believe, for the potential, for the fit, because you can then, if they've got the right attitude, you can teach that ability and that soft skill as well as the actual functional training as well.
Okay, that's good to know. Claire, how about your experience in the implementation and the benefits of the 20% off the job?
I mean, I think that I agree completely with David on the huge benefits that there are in having 20% off the job training, and likewise the opportunity to offer new entrants to our organisation facilitation skills, presentation, communication skills, that kind of thing, which only serves to make them more valuable employees as they go through their apprentice journey. So from my perspective, we welcome it, and we actually have quite a high target for training anyway, because we're in financial services, so we need to evidence that our staff are competent for role. But also I think that people sometimes miss the fact that things like buddying up, coaching, shadowing can also be counted towards your off-the-job targets. So people don't need to be so linear in thinking, gosh, this is a huge amount of away from the business. It's not necessarily, and that only serves to benefit the progression of the organisation.
Okay, great, thank you, Claire. And Darren, how do you think this has worked in GOSH as such?
Yeah, I think building on what Claire was saying, with us, the benefits of the staff having that protected time for the apprenticeship programme is obviously a big benefit, and ensuring that having the time means that they have a quality experience on the apprenticeship programme, and also making sure that the individual apprentices receive that support against their knowledge, skills and behaviours that really results in them successfully moving on into the role, so they get the rounded skills through the off-the-job training, and that allows them then to really move into the role on completion of the apprenticeship.
Okay, that's great. That's great to hear. I mean, I think what I'm hearing there is obviously there's alignment around the benefits for the apprentice as well, but there's also a clear sort of theme coming out around the focus around the soft skills and how that 20% can be used to actually align the apprentices, whether they are new entrants to the organization or even existing people, to pick up the behaviors that are expected of them within the workplace and within specific organizations from one to the other. Okay, thank you. That was a great discussion there. Moving on to some of the challenges that each of us may have been coming across in terms of implementing the 20% off the job. I'll go to Darren initially and sort of throw this question out to yourself. Obviously, you're a big world-class hospital. You have a big levy, I'm sure, and we all know and understand the pressures around the NHS and the delivery. What's your view on some of the challenges, and what advice would you give to other employers who are making this or who are trying to make this 20% off the job work?
Yeah. So in terms of the challenges, there's a number of challenges that we've obviously come across. So we've been delivering apprenticeships since 2012. So in terms of the reforms and the 20% off the job being introduced, that was an initial challenge for us because it was new to us as an organisation. So we had to move, obviously, in terms of implementing those changes. And obviously we had managers in the organisation that wasn't used to that. So we had to make sure that they was ready for those changes. And also the understanding of what the 20% off the job really is, what it can include, and all that sort of thing was obviously a key challenge as well. Some of the work-based learning apprenticeship programs rely a lot, that we've traditionally delivered, relied a lot on the job training. We've obviously had to look at that to make sure it was compliant with the new off-the-job requirements. So some of the things that we've done as an organisation in terms of overcoming the challenges. So we had a number of providers that we already worked with, and we have increased our apprenticeships over the last few years. So we took an opportunity to recontract with our training providers. So we've obviously looked at what our requirements are. So we've had stakeholder groups made up of different staff from across the organisation that have obviously looked at what our requirements are in terms of recontracting with a provider. And as an NHS trust, we've also done that in partnership with other local NHS trusts in our area and across London to make sure that obviously we're able to put them requirements together, and that's worked quite well. So we've set out what the programs are requiring and obviously recontracting the providers. Also regarding the 20% off the job, we work very closely with our training providers, what can be counted in the time and what can't be counted, and ensuring that there's clear systems, reporting in place, whether that be through our managers or through our training providers, but obviously having the apprentice at the heart of making sure that the time is recorded, and obviously they're getting the required off-the-job training.
Okay, great, thank you. And David, I mean, working for a blue chip, which is obviously a B2B organization, what kind of challenges have you come across? I mean, obviously your organization is quite different from Darren's. So what are the kind of different challenges that you've had?
So I think we don't really use as many training providers. We try and do a lot of the off-the-job stuff internally. So I think that kind of brings some different challenges. I think there's a time restraint on a 2-person L&D team and a resource, and then how do you work around that? And actually what we've learned, you've heard the panel talk about buddying systems and mentoring, and actually it's using subject matter experts, because actually then that helps enable and upskill them. So actually it's 2 birds, 1 stone, and everyone's a winner, right? Because you're developing 2 people at that same time. So we have a mentoring program with a buddy system. A lot of times businesses maybe try and introduce a mentor program or force a mentoring program, and actually if you introduce a mentoring program alongside other initiatives, whether that's leadership development, whether that's apprenticeships, then actually mentoring works a lot better and a lot more organically within the organisation and with people. Then there's a resource issue. So one of the challenges I face is I don't have a training room. I would love a training room. I'm looking at you, Claire. And I think the reason I talk about that, and again it's a B2B thing, is because our customers come first. So if we've got a customer coming into the office, and they need a conference room, I have to go and rearrange some training. And I understand it, totally get why we're doing it, but it's a challenge because it means that there's a lot of coordination and planning that goes into training, especially if you've got 15 delegates that are coming on, right? And so actually that resource can be a challenge. And I think how do you overcome the resource challenge? Well, if you like Claire and you have your own room, then that's great. But I think that there's ways around it. It's being open with the candidates. It's looking at potentially planning other backup availability. We've got some great resource just off site in case we do need to kind of go and move rooms. So I think there's ways around it. And being an IT company, we're very tech savvy, so we're all laptops and portable. So actually we're not restrained to the building as such. So that there's ways around it.
Yeah, great. Okay. And Claire, for yourself, I mean, obviously you're a services company, you clearly have an advantage in having a training room, as David pointed out, but some of the other challenges, I suppose, that you're facing still.
One thing that I would just want to link back to, I agree so much with what David is saying about the opportunities that the off-the-job training creates for other people in the organisation. One of the biggest and most unexpected benefits for our organisation was the opportunities that other members of staff who maybe weren't ready for promotion necessarily, but who were ready to take on additional responsibility. And the chances that they had to expand their breadth and share their knowledge of the organisation, or simply, some of the soft skills activities, was immense, and it was a huge opportunity for us. If I was to say, how we kind of got buy-in for this kind of off-the-job piece, I take it right back to the very beginning of the planning piece, in terms of we tightly model our headcount to our assets under management, and the way that you have to look at an apprentice is, you've got your basic apprentice minimum wage. We pay a bit more than that, but an apprentice for us, in terms of salary, costs about half as much as a specialist, and that's the area that they're going into to be trained up for. So going out to the business and saying, listen, actually, this person, we're prorating, it's 4 days a week you've got them, but you can have 2 for 1. So you've got 1 specialist vacancy there, but I'll give you 2 apprentices, and you can have them for basically 4 days a week. That's a really powerful piece for a recruiting manager, particularly in the administrative areas of the business, and even also for the support functions, that they could actually have 2 people that they can train from scratch. So from our perspective, it's worked really well, and it's been very popular. And the only other thing I'd say is that we did have to, at the beginning, I think people saw this as potentially a philanthropic exercise. We're going to bring in a load of kids, and they're going to be running riot, and financial services can be a little bit more staid sometimes. What we did is, I suppose if we were retail, you'd call it a lost leader. We brought in 1 apprentice, 1 brilliant apprentice, and then we literally showcased her across the business, so that people could see actually the calibre of these young people that can come into our organisation. And now what we're finding, to David and Darren's points, it's not just the youngsters that are coming in. We're creating opportunities for work returners, for people who've worked in other organisations such as retail or customer services, to come in and retrain with us. So it works really well, but sort of getting the finances right at the beginning in organisations that are very commercially focused, and I'm sure for the same for the guys that are really watching the bottom line on the cash, has been really valuable for us, because we didn't have the same challenges that Darren had in kind of re-educating people on what the process was. We were a little late to the apprentice party, but that meant that we didn't have to rework the model for people. So we have a benefit from that perspective. We kind of went in and said, this is the deal, and this is how much time we will spend training these people.
Okay, that's great. So a number of themes there. Obviously, I think engaging stakeholders, both internal and external, is coming out as a theme there. So how to engage different parts of the business, but also engaging with your training providers. If you are working with training providers, that seems to be something that obviously Darren referred to. And then I think the clear other theme that I looked at across the board was around the opportunities for existing members of staff. And I think that's a really key thing when you're actually still working in an environment or a landscape which is still evolving very much externally. How do you actually sell that internally to actually make it work? And I think 2 very good examples from both David and Claire around how do you actually engage the business and have this as an opportunity for existing members of staff to develop laterally or develop some other skills that can be utilized and be beneficial both for themselves and the business as well. And I think Claire also then picked up a very important point around planning and actually linking it to the headcount and actually understanding how this additional member of staff is going to add value to the business as well. So moving on to any better ways of implementing this 20% of the job requirement. And I think we've kind of touched upon it through the other questions as well. But Claire, I'll start with you around what do you think would be some of the better ways to implement this, and what advice from your perspective would you give to policymakers if you had the opportunity to change this requirement?
I think from my perspective, the framework is really important. And really the framework is important because it gives some people something to hang their hat on in the way in which they deliver it. Now, obviously for organisations that have been running apprenticeships for a long time, for some of them, there may be some challenges in implementing this kind of this model of delivering the apprenticeship program. And I mean, if I look back to, my own husband did an apprenticeship many years ago when we were both a lot younger and less tubby than we are now, but I remember thinking to myself, this isn't working. He's not actually being trained, and it wasn't useful for him. And he didn't follow a career with that apprenticeship. It ended at the end of a year, and he ended up moving on to a job with the NHS. But what it felt to me at that time was that they were kind of shuffling people through as cheap resource. This actually is a very clear message that this isn't a means of getting cheap resource through your business. It's a means of growing talent. For me, if I was going to say to people, how do you change the requirement? I don't think you do change the requirement. I think the training piece is really, really important. And I suppose my message wouldn't necessarily be to policymakers, but it would be to organisations to get out there and talk about the value that they've had, because I don't believe that we are alone in the three of us who are on this panel in saying that our apprentices add value much quicker and much more value than we expected them to when they walked through the door. And that was the biggest surprise for my organisation when we first went in, and we designed a long programme of training, and we expected that we wouldn't have any value out of apprentices for at least 6 months. That we would literally be hold-handing them, and that absolutely wasn't the case. We found that we had talented future leaders of the business who we just needed to invest in, and frankly, it was a bargain.
Great. Excellent. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Darren, how about yourself? What would you say would be any better way to implement this? Any advice for the policymakers there?
Yeah, I think just with regards to the off-the-job training, I mean, the maths and English requirement sits outside of the off-the-job training, and within the NHS, we do have a lot of staff and apprentices that join us that do need to work on their maths and English in order to meet the requirements for the apprenticeship standard. So that would be one thing that we would say to the policymaker, to look at how the maths and English can be incorporated into the off-the-job training. And that's not just from us as an employer, that's to obviously support and not to disadvantage the individuals that are coming in as apprentices, because obviously what we have to consider is the amount of time that apprentices having off the job, and what we don't want to do is disadvantage individuals that may need to improve their maths and English, which unfortunately sometimes it does lead to us having to look at individuals who already have the maths and English. That would be one key thing. The other thing is probably around the title of the job training, which has caused us a lot of confusion in terms of our managers, even the individual apprentices, over what can be counted. And like I was saying earlier, we work very closely with our training providers, look at what can be counted, but it may be something that we'd say to the policymakers is to consider the title of off the job, and maybe consider a better use of words to describe what off the job training really is.
Okay, that's a good point. And David, finally from yourself, any suggestions there?
So I think I'd massively echo Darren's point. We've just had our fresh batch of learners come through at the start of this month, and out of 7 of them, 3 of them didn't necessarily get they did an initial assessment, and it wasn't necessarily the results they needed. And I don't blame them. I sat down with them and did those tests, right? And like, they're not the easiest thing in the world if you haven't been to school or done Pythagoras and working out circumferences of cylinders. So I think absolutely, when we're talking about the benefits and the soft skill and everything that it can do, I think be aware of those functional skills, those maths and English. That's a great shout from Darren. And I think the best way is plan and be quite thorough. Don't think, right, I've got apprentices in, because they're not going to know what to do, and they're going to need a bit of hand holding, and you've got to be aware of that. And I think I do an hourly breakdown for the first 3 months, and yes, that changes because every business changes, but at least they've got a rough guide. And it's making sure that you work with the buddy that is supporting them, you work with their line manager. So yeah, they're my key things really.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I mean, so I think a few themes again there. I think Claire pointed out the long-term value of the apprentices, and the fact that the apprentices within Claire's organization are adding value earlier on in the process than anticipated is fantastic. It's an evidence of that. Some of the requirements around maths and English and how we can actually relook at including that within the apprenticeship time frame and the 20% of the job rather than having it a separate. I know I'm sure the ESFA will have a lot of views around that. We've just come up with a functional skills reform as well, which is proving to be quite a challenge in implementing as well. So I'm sure there are some lessons we can communicate to the policymakers there. And also the title of the 20% of the job, I think probably rebranding that would help in terms of executing there. And then David talked about the planning and executing and not underestimating the importance of that before we set off sort of defining the training program for the apprentices within the organization. Those are all these sort of scripted questions, if you like, and I will now move on to handing over to my colleague Sapna to see if there are any questions which have come in from the audience.
Thank you, Rahidi. Yes, there are a few questions that have been sent through. So I will read them out and ask you to direct them to the panelists.
Sure.
So the first question, what support have you had from trade unions?
Okay. Darren, do you want to go first on that?
Yeah, we have a staff side group that represent them within the organisation. So in terms of changes that we've made and in terms of implementing the programs, then some of that stuff has gone through our staff side, obviously to support that. But also in terms of the development of the apprenticeships. Because we're obviously NHS, there's a lot of wider development going on involving different partners, and obviously that will involve various representation from different unions and different groups that represent staff within the NHS.
Okay. Claire, how about yourself?
I mean, we don't have any trade union involvement in our business, so I'm afraid I can't answer that question.
Okay, sure. Yeah, of course. David, is that the same for yourself as well? I would presume. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, okay. Next question from you, Claire. Sapna, sorry.
Yes, so this question is for Claire. The two questions actually. First one, do your apprentices move into a permanent job at the end of the apprenticeship? And how does this work if you have two apprentices sitting in one vacancy?
That's a great question. We offer our apprentices a fixed term contract. We seek to convert them to permanent as soon as they finish their contracts, but we don't actually guarantee it. Having said that, because of the way that the business grows and the way that we very tightly model our FTE to assets under management, we've been very fortunate that we've been able to track and see where apprentices are coming up to the end of their programme and make sure that we hold vacancies back. It would be unusual for us not to be able to invite people to stay on with us, and very often actually, I mean, we've got quite a few across finance and operations that have then gone on to be promoted within role. What was the second part of the question?
I think Sapna might be on mute.
Sorry, yeah, sorry, apologies. The second part of the question was, how does this work if you have two apprentices sitting in one vacancy?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, again, it's all down to modelling the headcount. We are a very fast-paced business, probably the fastest-paced business I've ever worked in. So that kind of landscape of headcount is constantly being monitored depending on the portfolios that we manage. So there is a little bit of alchemy in that, but we work very carefully to see where the vacancies are coming through. Typically, though, this is a competitive environment for specialists in operations on the call centre side. So we're very glad to have grown our own talent and have double resource coming up through. And don't get me wrong, if we've got talented young people in the business, we'll go over headcount to keep them in until we need, because there's always plenty of work to be done. So we're very pragmatic about that requirement. We do model tightly, but if we've got someone who's valuable to us, that's a small cost. You know, for someone who's coming in at the entry level, to keep them on for maybe a few months, even though there isn't a vacancy, against the cost of recruiting and training someone else up from scratch. If we've already invested that much into them, we would ride with it for a while if they're really, really good.
And I just wanted to see if Darren had any views on that as well, because obviously I think you're probably in a similar situation in terms of requirement from a workforce perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, the way we recruit apprenticeships at Great Ormond Street Hospital is we ask all managers when recruiting for an entry-level position to consider an apprentice, and then we look at the suitability of that role and ensure we have a suitable apprenticeship program to match. So all our apprentices actually sit in substantial roles. So they're employed on a fixed-term contract, and then on completion of the apprenticeship, they move into the role. We established quite early on that method, so we basically, all our apprentices have jobs waiting for them at the end of it, and that's based on them completing the apprenticeship, and we have a really good success rate of apprentices completing, and obviously we make sure they get all the support so they do complete, so we can almost say that all apprentices are guaranteed a job on completion of the apprenticeship.
Okay, that's great. David, anything else to add from your perspective?
No, I think, you know, Blue Chip are absolutely the same. You know, I think Claire hit the nail on the head when she talked about the commercial awareness of if you've invested in someone for whatever that apprenticeship time frame is, 15 months, 18 months, 2 years, etc., and you know that person's the right fit for the business, then why would you go through the recruitment process and the, you know, betting on a new starter that you might not necessarily have fit into the team and the business, and the cost of all of that, and the time and the resource. So at Blue Chip, you know, we do the same as both Darren and Claire do, which is offer it as a fixed term, and I think, you know, a lot of employers will do that, but we're really proud that we can also say that, you know, we have never not placed someone after their apprenticeship, and they might move into a slightly different role, and that's through business growth, or because they've identified that's part of their professional and personal development plan. But yeah, we always offer that. You know, every business has growth and nutrition, hopefully. Every business has nutrition, not necessarily growth, but and so yeah, normally there's room to fit them.
Okay, that's great. Next question, Sapna.
Yes, okay. So this question is for David. What training have the mentors had to support apprentices?
Okay, yeah, it's a great question, because obviously you need to give them that training and support. So that's where myself and my partner within the L&D team will do sessions around how to give feedback. So, you know, how to do effective feedback. They have communication training, they have the insights profile done, so they've got a better self-awareness for them, but also an awareness for the other person. So we invest quite heavily in that person, and you know, like I said before when answering the question, is we use it as an opportunity to develop and upskill them, but we'll have like a learning package which is around mainly communication, insights, giving effective feedback. They'll be the kind of 3 key things, and then, you know, we might also act as a mentor to the mentor, if that makes sense, you know, and supporting them in that aspect.
And Claire, you talked about sort of budding and shadowing as well within your organization. So just adding on to what David's mentioned, how do you sort of provide that support to the apprentices and maybe the employees as well? Yeah.
We offer that support internally, and we also partner with an organisation called Raise Your Potential that we use to upskill people around coaching and mentoring. For us, it's been very, very good in identifying people who would have future potential as managers and team leaders in the business. And we've got quite a strong internal performance management and manager training program that we offer people to take advantage of in order to be a good support to the apprentices. But the other thing that we also do, which is really valuable, is we take SMEs from across the business, which probably the guys do as well, but we hadn't realised the benefit of it, but we get them to come in and write the programme, to help us to write the programme for the apprentices. And what we found was that was a great learning experience for those individuals to get very much involved in the learning and development process. and again was an opportunity for people to really excel in a different way to their standard, day job. So it's all in-house, that piece, really, with the exception of our partner that we bring in to deliver scheduled training across the business.
Okay, and Darren, I mean, obviously yours is quite a different organisation. Does shadowing and mentoring and support actually work within the NHS effectively?
Yeah, I mean, mentoring is embedded within the NHS. A lot of the regulated roles will require the trainees to have mentors. So with apprentices, it's a natural thing that we would do that. So, for example, our entry-level role on our wards is a healthcare support worker. So that's the starting point for somebody working on the wards, working with our children that are in our care. And all of those healthcare support workers have a mentor, and the mentor is part of the apprenticeship programme, and they are required to support and sign off different elements of the programme, as well as providing that mentoring support. So it's a natural thing that we do that, and that's not just within those programmes, but in other programmes we also have mentoring opportunities. And I think Claire alluded to it earlier about the opportunity that brings for staff. I mean, we've got over 5,000 staff as an organisation, and mentoring that allows some of our staff the opportunity to progress, and they get the opportunity to be exposed to certain things that they wouldn't be within their role. So having being a mentor for an apprentice definitely gives the other staff a great opportunity, and it also allows them to be supportive of the apprenticeship programme across the organisation.
Great, thank you. Next question then, Sapna.
Yes. So this question from the audience, they first of all say that they appreciate the panel's perspective regarding 20% off the job, but in a really commercially focused business where ROI or productivity is key, how do you mitigate the 20% to business leaders or department managers?
Okay, Claire, do you want to go first on that? I think you'll probably have some specific views around that.
For me, I think it comes down to the numbers. So I've just written a few notes here, really. Your basic apprentice wage is £3.90 an hour. We choose not to pay that. We pay the minimum wage for 21 to 24, which is about £7.70. Okay, so that gives you a salary of about £15,000. If you prorate that salary and say that actually it's 4 days, it's still less. If that salary is over 4 days and you prorate it up to the 5, it's still much less than it would cost for a specialist to come into our business. So, I mean, we are financial services, but I go in with the numbers. The numbers add up because this is clearly valuable resource that we will have into our business. It's cheaper than the most basic administrator. And, if I then go back in and talk to them about the apprentice levy and the funding that we get back and the opportunity to co-invest and provide opportunities to everyone else in the business, my managers are falling over to take advantage of this. I would say that this is truly commercial for us and is a very good way to support any organisation that claims to have an ambition to grow its own talent. And growing your own talent, should be something that we're aiming for, so that we can offer opportunities to move up through the business. Because every time I bring in someone at the bottom of the organisation and offer people the opportunity to move up a bit higher, I'm showing people that there's a pathway and a journey to have in my organisation. So I would much rather bring in apprentices and show the commercial value, prorate them to 4 days a week, marry that up against our FTE planner, and then marry that up against the opportunities that we have against our headcount on the apprentice levy to give people training on, I've got people in my team doing their HR qualifications. I've got people doing the triple threat masters in business management with the Open University. The opportunities are endless. I would say in a commercial organisation, this is a no-brainer, no-brainer.
How about yourself, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm the exact same as Claire, really. I think in terms of, the easiest and best way, if you're going on productivity KPIs, is by just saying, okay, imagine this person's working at 4 days a week, and Claire, and Claire was talking around, forecasting them at half productivity for their first 3 months. They're still going to be at a stage, 6 months down the road. I think the other thing that Claire just touched upon in terms of the HR qualifications and stuff is that, apprenticeships aren't labour-based apprenticeships anymore. Apprenticeships can cover so many different things. And I think it doesn't matter what organisation you're in, there is just a wealth, and there are being more and more added, like all the time, every day, like new standards are coming out. And, yes, there's a bit of research that you need to do on those newer ones, but there's so much stuff that you can do internally, even if you don't bring in an apprenticeship as an external candidate, and you look at using that levy, because I imagine most of our audience are from businesses where they are paying the levy, and actually, if we're paying that money, use that to invest in staff, use that to upskill junior HR people or finance people or customer service people. There's some absolutely great stuff out there, and I think people would be daft not to use it. And I think Claire's framework of that full day a week is an absolute easy win if you need to encourage stakeholders.
That's great, thank you. I mean, the two clear sort of perspectives there, obviously from an entry-level perspective around the economics of the entry-level worker and the wage salary and the benefits and the value and cost and benefit analysis there, but also David touched upon sort of the existing workforce, and we have a similar situation in our organization where we are using the levy to upskill our existing workforce because of the whole digital transformation agenda, which is very, very key and critical across most organizations today. And I think it's the productivity, it's putting a value to the productivity index, which that existing staff member is bringing to the team. So I have an existing member of staff who is doing an apprenticeship. He has been in the organization for 10 years, but just by virtue of him doing an apprenticeship, it added confidence and the added productivity that he's bringing to the team far exceeds what I would have needed to employ maybe 2 other members of staff to actually do the equal amount of work that he is doing by himself. And this is alongside him working those 4 days a week and still devoting that 1 day a week to his apprenticeship preparation. So it is absolutely.
And Rohini, I imagine, right? There might be, if he's been in the organisation for 10 years, there might be some of it just a validation of learning, but that's okay as well. That's that confidence thing that you touched on is absolutely. Sometimes people need that little bit of recognition and going into a room and meeting people from other organisations and actually going, you know what, I do know this. I'm good at this. I can do this. That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely right, exactly, and he's exactly doing that. He knows his job, but it's almost like a validation to say, yes, you can go on to the next level, be the project manager, lead a project, lead some people that you're not managing directly. So it's all of that which adds to that confidence as well. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Darren, did you have anything to add as well? Obviously, you're probably not a commercial organization, but I'm sure you have instances where people are adding value.
No, we're not a commercial organisation, but finances are obviously really key to us within the NHS. So probably just as much as a commercial organisation. But we're using apprenticeships to really build our workforce for the future, and that's really how we're benefiting from apprenticeships in terms of it helping support with recruitment and retention. So it really does, as David and Claire have said, the benefits probably they do far outweigh. So in terms of having apprenticeships and losing them for 20% of the time, if that's supporting us with recruitment and retention, we'd rather have people for 80% of the time than not have them at all. And we all know what's involved with recruiting staff and how long it takes and getting them trained up. So if we get better retention from our staff and our apprentices, and over time we are seeing those benefits. We're seeing that apprentices are progressing within the organisation and they are staying. So there's some real benefits. And if the sacrifice is that we have to give them some time off to develop their skills, I'm sure they fully appreciate that, and we probably get more than 20% of their time back in the long run in terms of the motivation they have as a result of the apprenticeship.
That's great. Great, thank you. Next question then, Sapna.
How do you record off the job? And have you received any feedback on this from the ESFA and the Ofsted?
Okay. David, do you want to go first on that?
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, it'll be dependent on the provider that you use. So they'll normally have their own kind of e-learning platform where where users log in and then manually do it. On the initial kind of onboarding stage, we'll normally enter this as a group. So because our onboarding program is really around getting people in as a team and working together, and there's a lot of initial training. We kind of do quite a bit of front loading sometimes in that first maybe month, where I really, as an L&D resource, help them. So what we'll do is as every week as a group, we'll get together and make sure everyone's synced up, just so that they get experience of using the system that tracks it. And then what it becomes is pretty much an admin task, which is, they will normally probably do it retrospectively at the end of their week. That's what works for them. But people are different. Some people might go to a training session, go back to their desk and straight away log into the portal and enter it. Some people may make a note of it that they attended and do it in some admin time at the end of the week. So I think it's different for different people. In terms of monitoring, we haven't had any problems, touch wood, so far, in terms of that. So I can't answer to that point.
Okay. And that's in relation to the ESFA, the point about the ESFA audit. Yeah. Darren, how about yourself in terms of tracking and monitoring 20% of the job?
Yeah, well, we're not a main provider. We work with a number of organisations, so we wouldn't be directly audited by the ESFA or visited by Ofsted. But obviously, we are, as an employer, we are involved in ensuring that the 20% off the job does happen. It is a bit of an admin task. I mean, David did allude to that, which is a bit unfortunate, really, because it is an admin task that the apprentices just have to record the time. We've had some success in terms of the apprentices reflecting on their learning, so it's been good from that point of view. But we heavily rely on our training providers to support and to make it less onerous, and to try and see the benefits to the apprentices on recording the off the job. But really, that's not the benefit of recording it. Is not the benefit. The benefit is them actually getting the time and them undertaking the learning, like I was saying earlier, and ensuring that they get the knowledge, skills and behaviours to move into their role at the end of their apprenticeship.
Yeah. And Claire, how about yourself? How do you do this activity?
Likewise, we wouldn't be audited. We do rely on external providers, but we're quite lucky that we've got a fairly good LMS that we use called The Success, and we roll out a lot of the online training via that portal, which tracks the time automatically. And we're a little bit parental in that we log all of our apprentices' time and activity. And then in addition to that, we would send out regular communications asking people to just let us know any other training activity that they've taken part in, so that we can log that. I think for us, because we are a regulated entity, it's very important for us to track not just our apprentices' training hours, but all of our employees' training hours. So from our perspective, I think we're fairly lucky that in respect of logging apprentice training hours, we kind of already had an imperative with our existing staff, so it wasn't really very new to us.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Sapna, next question. We have another 10 minutes to go on this, so I'm assuming that we are still okay to answer some more questions there.
Yes, yes, of course. This question is aimed at Darren. So I'll read out the comment from the member of the audience, so bear with me. I work for a training provider delivering to existing non-clinical NHS staff members in the local hospitals. Some of my apprentices are finding it difficult to find time for the off-the-job due to staffing constraints, which means that their department can't spare them. How do you deal with these issues at GOSH?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. So this is what I was talking about working closely with your training provider as an organisation to ensure that the time is planned. So kind of trying to find the off-the-job hours or expecting it to happen when there's no clear plan is likely to fail from both the employer and the training provider's point of view. So we, like I said, we've recontracted our training providers. We've delivered apprenticeships prior to these rules, and obviously now we're delivering them. So it is still a challenge, especially for existing staff that already enrolls and that are signing up to apprenticeships. But what we do as an organisation is we ensure that the commitment is there up front, so that the manager and the individual is fully committed to the apprenticeship, including the off-the-job training that's required. And then we would expect our training provider to ensure that the manager is fully briefed on that as well. So we run what we call manager sessions for our managers that have existing staff that are going on apprenticeships. So the manager is fully aware of what they're committed to, and that they are given the appropriate support and the release requirements to allow the existing member of staff to take part in the apprenticeship.
Okay. And I think during the discussion, we also had several comments from the panel members around what to count as part of the 20% of the job. So it's not, I think Claire, you mentioned something specifically around, it's not one thing, and you know, it can be a variety of different things that actually count towards that 20% of the job. So are there sort of creative ways of actually sitting down with the employer and to look at, you know, what can be, as part of the normal course of job, be counted within that 20%? I don't know, Claire, did you have anything to say around that?
I'm so sorry, I didn't. And I think, yeah, we do need to be creative, but I still think that there should always be a framework. And I think we need to be very clear on what does and doesn't count in order to make sure that that we don't do our apprentices any kind of a disservice. But I'm alive to the fact in some organisations where, you know, there is a real time pressure, how you do that and how you meet the needs of the organisation at the same time as meeting the needs of the learner, it's a challenge. And I think each organisation has to find their own solutions. But the framework for that and what does and doesn't count as off-the-job learning is really, really important, so that it's clear and accidental advantage isn't taken on either side.
Yeah, okay. Just conscious of time, Sapna, maybe one more question?
Yes, one more question. Okay, so if an apprentice is completing online learning as opposed to attending out of the office training, does this count towards 20% off the job?
David, do you want to go first on that?
Yes. So as long as it is, and you know, the whole panel have been talking about, you know, understanding what does and doesn't. If the training isn't related to their role, it counts as off the job training. So GDPR, it can count as off the job training, right? And most businesses use that as a e-learning module because that's the easiest way to ship out GDPR training to people. So absolutely, e-learning, you know, you've got three advocates on this panel, and Rahini maybe four, you know, in terms of a blended learning approach. And so absolutely, e-learning is part of the off-the-job learning process. So back to my original answer, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the 20% of the job guidance is very, very clear. E-learning definitely is part of that. It's very clearly written in there as well. So no doubts about that. One last question, maybe, Sapna?
One of the challenges we faced in my organization is being able to encourage employers to provide off-the-job to learners. Is that an average about 4 hours a week?
It depends on how many hours a week they're working, doesn't it? For us, off-the-job training at 20% would be 1 day, so 7.5 hours.
Yeah.
But I think what is important is that actually, you know, you can. It's not like you have to do it on a weekly or monthly basis, so it's across the whole apprenticeship. So you know, similar to what Claire does, is, you know, in terms of thinking of it like 1 day a week, but actually, you know, some of our learners, we might send them off for a 2-day course, right? You know, so it just depends. It's over time. What we're actually finding, I alluded to it before, where that 20% off the job number may sound scary and big, but actually a lot of our apprentices hit that way before the end of their apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And I think, David, you also, sorry, Claire, go on.
Oh, sorry. I mean, I'll just agree with David, although I'm kind of couching it as and saying just look at it as 1 day a week. We tick off a huge chunk of that 20% in the first 6 weeks that someone is in our organisation with that kind of intensive training program where they learn so much different stuff around the industry generally, and it's not about teaching them how to do their job specifically. And then after that, you know, it kind of snowballs. So exactly your point, David.
Darren, how about yourself?
Well, I haven't really talked about it today, but and the nursing apprenticeships that we will be launching soon at Great Ormond Street Hospital, but are available widely within the NHS. They are regulated by the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and 20% is way lower than what they would expect, and in fact it's more than 50% that they're required off the job in terms of attendance at university, and also regarding the number of placement hours they have to do. And like I said, that way exceeds, it's more than 50% of the time that they fulfill in off-the-job training, and that's not the apprenticeships that set that as a rule, the 20% off the job. That's regulated by the NMC.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, I'm just conscious of time. We're just coming up to the full hour for that we devoted to this webinar. So I think we'll stop it there. And Sapna, if there are additional questions, what we will do is we'll get the responses to that back to the audience as well. Can I just take this opportunity to really thank our panel. So Claire, Darren, and David, thank you so much for your valuable time, taking out that 1 hour from your really busy schedules, I'm sure. It's been a really good insight to have from your perspective, and I'm sure the audience has benefited lots to learn from your perspective on the 20% of the job. And to our audience, well, thank you very much for joining us. I hope this has clarified some of the confusion or some of the doubts that you had about the benefits of the 20% of the job. And we will shortly be sharing the recording for the webinar, as well as the responses to your questions. Have a great rest of the day, all of you. And thank you again, Claire, Darren, and David, for your time.